Mandrakes, divination, household idols, and pagan rituals. This is everything you find in Genesis 30. Maybe you never noticed that, but you're about to see why this is especially interesting. This story is all about a sibling rivalry and a fight for power and recognition. Two women are fighting over the same husband only to cause more chaos for themselves. And you're about to see how this is a mere reflection of Jacob and Esau's sibling rivalry in an earlier chapter. Maybe this type of Bible study is new for you, but I believe this chapter is about to come alive for you like never before. Hopefully you'll never read this chapter the same after this study. Let's jump into Genesis chapter 30. Since this is a Bible study on Genesis chapter 30, we're going to look at every single verse, read verse by verse, and we're going to pay attention to specific details in every single verse as we build up to the main point of this video. So you're going to have to be patient, you're going to have to work with me, and don't skip out on the rest of this just to skipping your way to the end, or you're going to miss the context, you're going to miss the framework for this chapter, and things won't make as much sense. So to keep things in context, the earlier chapter, if you haven't watched that video, chapter 29, Jacob is on the run, finds himself in Padan Aram, where he lives with his uncle Laban, works for over 20 years to marry one of his daughters, Rachel. Laban tricks Jacob, gives Jacob his other daughter instead, and Jacob finds himself married to two women, which isn't ideal. And one of those wives, Leah, ends up bearing children for Jacob, ends up having 4 children for Jacob, while the other one, Rachel, remains barren. And before all of this happens, Jacob does something cool, which I think foreshadows the resurrection of Jesus. So to summarize this chapter, Jacob's 2 wives are battling for Jacob's attention and affection. God regards both of them in different ways and gives each of them their own children. One of these kids will grow up to find some mandrakes, which is really odd because one of Jacob's wives really wants those mandrakes for a deeper reason. And in the background of all of this, Jacob's uncle Laban is growing jealous of Jacob's success and wealth. And Jacob realizes that he needs to leave before things get worse. And so what do mandrakes, divination, and paganism have to do with this story? You're about to find out. Verse 1 says, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. Right? Leah's pumped out 4 children. Rachel has none. She says to Jacob, right? She sees, then she says, give me children or I shall die. Dramatic much? She evaluated Leah's fruitfulness through a lens of personal envy and jealousy and selfishness. And so the way that she thinks about what she sees leads to a kind of desire for what Leah has, right? And we're now seeing the sibling rivalry that was displayed in Jacob and Esau earlier, Cain and Abel in Genesis 4, right? Esau saw that Jacob was blessed, and Jacob took his blessing. So Cain, or Esau rather, interprets that through the lens of selfishness and bitterness, and intends to kill Jacob. Right? Cain the same, saw that Abel was accepted by God and favored, and Cain grew bitter and desired to kill Abel, ends up doing that. And she says to Jacob, give me children, like Jacob is in control of that. She sees, she desires, and then she demands Jacob give her children. She reaches for what she doesn't have. And Sarah, in earlier chapters, was the wife of Abraham. Sarah saw that she was barren, and she told Abraham, since I don't have a child, since we don't have a future, here, and she takes Hagar and says, Abraham, sleep with my Egyptian servant. And in the same way, Genesis 3, Eve sees the fruit, desires it, and takes it. So there's a consistent, on the part of humanity, reaching for what a person doesn't have or thinks they need or thinks they're lacking. But it starts with seeing, and then desiring that, and then demanding they get that. And this is all about Rachel having children. She wants status, prominence, significance. This is not about Jacob having children. This is about Rachel. Give me children, because Leah has children. Jacob, you have children. I don't. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Which is really interesting, because Jacob seems to think that God is withholding children from her. Is this Jacob's interpretation of the situation, and it's wrong? Or is God actually doing that? And why would God withhold children from her? Is it because of something she did? Likely, I think one of the most reasonable explanations is not just the way that God intends to display his grace and magnify his glory by doing what only he could do, But also, I think there is a personal reason why Rachel is actually barren, and it has to do with paganism and idolatry, as we'll see that she steals her father's household gods. And so when Rachel says, I'm going to die if you don't give me children, that's a little dramatic, right? But that's what Esau says a couple chapters ago. Well, when he comes in from hunting, he's starving, he sees Jacob making stew, and he goes, give me that food or I'm going to die. And I go, well, hold on, both of you, Rachel and Esau, why is that the only other option? Why is it eat or you're going to die? Or for Rachel, why is it have children or you'll die? Are you exaggerating? Are you serious? Either way, we have both sisters here looking at each other, right? Earlier in the previous chapter, Leah looked at Rachel being loved and wanted by Jacob, and Leah grows jealous and feeling overlooked, and God sees that. Now we have Rachel looking at Leah's fruitfulness, which resulted from her being overlooked in the first place, and now Rachel's jealous of what Leah has. So there's this constant struggle, sibling rivalry happening. And Rebekah, if you remember, was barren along with Sarah, now Leah, or rather Leah as well, and God filled all their wombs. And so here's what Rachel recommends. I don't have children yet. God's withheld from me. So here's my servant Bilhah. Go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf, a kind of surrogate, that even I may have children through her. Rachel just wants kids. Doesn't matter how it's going to happen. She just wants her own kids. She's pulling a Sarah. This is like verbatim what Sarah says to Abraham after God gives them a promise. You're going to have kids. And she goes, well, it's been a long time. It seems as though God has not given us kids yet. So since that's the case, Abraham, here's my servant Hagar, my Egyptian servant. Go into her and we'll acquire a child by her. Same thing happening. All right. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. This is reminiscent of Sarah giving Hagar to Abraham. And then in Genesis 3, Eve eats the fruit and gives to her husband, right? And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son, right? So it doesn't say she bore Rachel a son, but Jacob gets a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged me and has heard my voice and has given me a son, right? So Rachel makes herself out to be some kind of victim. She's oppressed. She has no children. She's barren. God heard my voice. As God does hear the cry of the oppressed all throughout Scripture. He has several times in Genesis so far. God hears the blood of Abel crying from the ground against Cain. God hears the cry against Sodom and Gomorrah, the cry of the oppressed. They outcry against those cities. God hears the cry against the wicked generation of Noah, right? Blood being shed, the oppressed. And eventually God will hear the cry of Israel in slavery to Egypt, right? But my question is, Rachel goes, God has judged me. He's obviously for me. He's vindicating me. Is Rachel correct about this? Or is this just how she perceived things? Because she makes herself out to be the kind of oppressed victim here. And this will be very similar to the family feud we see later on with barren Hannah. In 1 Samuel, Hannah's barren. There's another competing wife who has children. She doesn't. And weirdly enough, she calls his name Dan. Her first son is named Dan. He's born out of competition, rivalry, jealousy, lack, right? And then he's born out of, Rachel giving her servant to Jacob to sleep with, taking things into her own hands. And weirdly enough, the tribe of Dan, they will not have a great reputation later on in the biblical story. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings, I've wrestled with my sister. I would love to know what she means by this. She thinks she's doing something. I've been fighting with my sister and I've prevailed. You ain't done nothing. You said, hey, I have a servant, Jacob. You guys should do the work and make me a child. So she called his name Naphtali. So we have 2 kids from Rachel's servant. We have 4 kids from Leah personally. That makes Jacob's family a grand total of 6 kids. For Rachel, Bilhah is nothing more than a tool. And then when she says, I've wrestled with my sister, there's this competition language, obviously. It's an image of how Jacob and Esau viewed each other competitively. They spend their lives wrestling with each other since they were in the womb of Rebekah. Remember that? And eventually, in a couple chapters, Jacob will be wrestling, actually literally wrestling physically with the angel of the Lord. and the angel of the Lord will tell him that he's wrestled with man and has prevailed. Very similar language. And you don't see much of that language used of any other biblical characters except here, Rachel and Jacob. Jacob and Rachel are very similar in this way. Both are the younger siblings. Both are reaching for what they don't have as firstborns, They're overreaching, grabbing at the heels. Both are competing with their older siblings and end up wrestling with their fellow man to attain and achieve by their own efforts what they didn't previously have that they wanted, right? For her, it's kids. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, there's that evaluation again. Sisters are constantly assessing their performance and assessing how their numbers are doing. And I'm not bearing children. She took her servant Zilpah, just like Rachel did, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. She's like, I didn't know we're playing by these rules. I can give my servant to Jacob? All right. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, good fortune. That's important. It's like a pagan idea. Not just God has done good, but good fortune, good luck, has come. So she called his name Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, happy am I, for women have called me happy. They named him Asher. Right, so we're up to a grand total of 8 children. 4 of those are from the servants. And I think this is a pagan idea of luck or fortune or whatever it ends up being. It's not exactly a biblical, theologically accurate idea. In the days of wheat harvest, now we're transitioning. With all this happening, Jacob's family growing, the feud getting worse, the servants getting roped into this. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben, remember the oldest, he went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. And then Rachel said, Leah, please give me. Well, it's all we've been seeing throughout the story is give me. Give me kids, give me affection, give me love, give me some of your son's mandrakes. But Leah says to Rachel, or rather, Rachel said to Leah. Now Leah is saying to Rachel, is it a small matter that you've taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? What's the deal with these mandrakes? Rachel said, good point. He can lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. Now, Reuben's getting roped into this too. The children are being caught up in this. It's a very unhealthy family dynamic, right? And so this all happens in the days of harvest, wheat harvest. As we'll see in a minute, these mandrakes are actually considered to be good omens for harvest. That's why earlier Leah is said to be saying, good fortune has come upon me. Well, mandrakes are good omens, not just for harvest, but for wombs, right? Fruitfulness and having children and being able to conceive, which is another pagan idea. And so that's the cultural understanding of mandrakes and how that fits into their pagan ideology and worldview and how God works in their world. And Rachel goes, give me some of your mandrakes. Why? What does she want the mandrakes for? Because she's barren. And you want as many good omens, good fortunes, good charms, good luck charms for fruitfulness if you want to bear children. And this idea of give me some of your son's mandrakes, remember how much this story, their feud, parallels Jacob and Esau's story. Earlier, Esau said, a couple chapters ago, give me some of your stew, Jacob. Now, Rachel's desperate for mandrakes right after she just showed this obsessive desperation for children. They're just always reaching. It's never enough, right? It's never enough. And Rachel goes, tell you what, give me the mandrakes that your son found, little Reuben, and you can sleep with Jacob tonight. What's weird is that Rachel talks about Jacob as if he's her property to do with as she pleases, like she owns Jacob. And so we see a trade happening. Give me mandrakes, you can get Jacob. This makes it seem like Rachel keeps Jacob to herself all the time, and Leah never gets a chance to be with him to have more children, right? To kind of even the odds, Rachel's kind of keeping Jacob away, and Jacob does prefer that, and so he's not exactly opposed to that. So this is the kind of trade that Jacob made when he saw the opportunity with Esau. Esau goes, give me the bowl of stew. And Jacob goes, give me your birthright. Then I'll give you some stew. Now Rachel uses Jacob as incentive for Leah to give her mandrakes. So what is the significance of these mandrakes? Why is Rachel so desperate for them? Mandrakes are known to be an aphrodisiac, I think that's the way to pronounce it, involved in magic as a kind of fertility charm to bear offspring and to make one's womb fruitful. So Rachel wants children so badly. And she sees these mandrakes as a way to secure children, which reveals once again their pagan thinking and superstition. She wants this plant so badly that she'll sacrifice, not kill, but give up her husband for a night. And she does not trust God for kids. She is constantly taking things into her own hands. And do we not do the same? Where we take matters into our own hands. Things aren't working. Things aren't moving fast enough. So to secure my spot, I'll have to do it myself. Hey, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and I have some free gifts for you on our website at abovereproachministry.com. Maybe you want to learn how to study the Bible. We have free Bible classes just for you. Are you maybe a newer believer? Go ahead and check out our Christianity 101 Foundations course. Maybe you hate videos. Well, we have a podcast, so you can listen to all of our messages on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Maybe you want to join or start a discussion group. Check out our map of all the current armed discussion groups all around the world. And do you maybe live near Greenville, South Carolina? If you do, you should check out our church. Visit movementchurchsc.com for more information. And if you'd like to partner with us financially, you can snag a copy of my book, Fruitful, or head over to the donate page and donate through debit or credit card, PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, Patreon, or even mail a check to P.O. Box 509 Inman, South Carolina. And if you want to make a ministry connection, feel free to reach out to me on our website. All right, I know that was a lot, but I'm done. So let's get back to the video. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him. You must come in to me. I've hired you with my son's mandrakes. What a weird thing to come home to. Apparently this doesn't happen a lot. So he lay with her that night, and God what? God listened to Leah. God saw, God heard. Now God is actively listening. What did God listen to? I don't see any cry from her. I don't see any prayer. But we did see that God saw her earlier and gave her children. And now God hears her twice, and she conceives and bore Jacob a fifth son. And Leah said, God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband. So his name was Issachar. So I think we're at number 9, kids, right? This is just so odd because she sees this child as her due. This is transactional. They're just trying to one-up each other. And Leah's kind of running behind. So she's like, well, I need to get more children. She sees her opportunity. And here's the transaction in her mind, where God's paying her back for what? For giving her servant to Jacob, which is a weird way of viewing the situation. It doesn't mean it's accurate. It's just describing how they're perceiving what's happening, how they're understanding these things that are taking place. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me. She's back to that whole thing. Because I've borne him 6 sons. Boom, we got Zebulun. We got 6 from Leah. We got 4 from the servants. We're up to 10. Rachel will provide the last 2. And then we'll see a daughter kind of caught up in the mix, right? Thrown in there. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. So, and she will be a huge focus of a future story. Then God remembered. See how active God is behind the scenes, though his hand isn't apparent as quickly as the sisters would want. It's not as evident. God is working behind the scenes. He sees, he regards, he hears, he listens, he remembers Rachel. And God listened to her and opened her womb. And again, my question is, what is it that God is responding to? Is there a cry going up that's not recorded? Is there a prayer that these women are praying? She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken my reproach away. And she called his name Joseph. The interesting thing is, Joseph will end up in Egypt and will name his sons according to the kind of reproach that has fallen on him as being sold into slavery as a foreigner living in a land he doesn't belong to. So that will be reversed. saying, may the Lord add to me another son. So Joseph is named in hopes of another son. Notice that it's never enough. I'm waiting for the next one. I'm looking ahead to the next one. And that's how many of us live. As soon as Rachel had born Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, you know what? Could you send me away that I may go to my own home? He doesn't see this as his own home. And my own country. He doesn't see it as his homeland. My mother comes from here. I don't belong here. Give me, so now we got Jacob saying, give me my wives, my children, for whom I have served you, that I may go. You know the service I have given you. All these transactional moments throughout this story, man. We've seen this in the last couple chapters. Esau says, give me my blessing. Jacob says, give me your birthright. Rachel says, give me children. Leah says, give me my husband. Rachel says, give me those mandrakes. Just an example on repeat of how humanity is constantly desiring, reaching, and seizing what they feel entitled to. And why does Jacob speak to Laban as if Laban owns his family? Like, these are your women, your children. Why is he saying, give me? Is it because they're in his house under Laban's authority? But Laban said to him, if I've found favor in your sight, I've learned by what? Divination, which is interesting, that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Laban has come to know some secret knowledge. And as we saw earlier, Jacob views this whole thing as transactional. We'll come back to the Laban divination thing. But Jacob views this whole thing as like, hey, I worked for the wives. You know, Leah's like, hey, I gave mandrakes for Jacob. Esau worked for his blessing, that kind of thing. It's this constant, I'm not just going to reach for, I'm going to earn. I'm going to achieve it. I'm going to do what's required to attain it. And Laban here learns by divination. He has pagan rituals, apparently. He's involved in paganism. But here's the interesting thing, is he seems to know the Lord God of Abraham. At least he honors God in some way. And so divination is obviously real here. This isn't some counterfeit. Laban gains legitimate insight. But the question becomes, is divination bad here? And is it being framed up as good? Or is it just describing what transpired? Because Laban learned of God's hand on Jacob through divination. He's looking at the favor going, how is it? By divination, Laban finds out, oh, God's hand of favor is on you. And we'll see eventually later in Numbers, there's this interesting seer named Balaam or Balaam. He interacts with the true God by divination. And again, the stories aren't making any kind of moral commentary on divination and saying it's good because they encountered God, or it's bad. We already see clearly in the law of God, like divination bad. So we don't need the narrative to kind of comment on that. It's just describing what happened. He says, name your wages, Jacob, and I'll give it. Because Jacob's ready to go home, and Laban's like, no, I found out you're blessed. I want to keep you around, right? Name your wages. Jacob goes, okay. You know how I've served you and how your livestock has fared with me, right? You had a little before I came. I mean, Jacob ain't lying. And it has increased abundantly. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned, right? Laban is just experiencing the overflow of Jacob's blessing and favor. So God is allowing Jacob's blessing to, affect positively Laban and his household. And Laban notices, it's because I'm close to you, Jacob. And we're going to see that same idea with Jacob's son Joseph later on, where Joseph brings abundance and favor wherever he goes, into Potiphar's house, into all of Egypt, into the prison. I mean, the hand of God is on Joseph, and those in proximity to Joseph benefit from it. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also? Like, I got to become my own family, bro. He said, what shall I give you? Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. Here's what you'll do. Do this for me. I'll pasture your flock, and I'll keep it. Okay. Let me pass through all your flock today and remove all the speckled, all the spotted sheep, and every black lamb, and the spotted and the speckled among the goats, and that's what you'll pay me. That's an interesting request. And we're going to see in the next chapter that Jacob actually got this information, this wisdom, by a dream from God, just as Laban acquired information by divination. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Everyone that is not speckled and not spotted and not black among the lambs, if found with me, counted as stolen. This is going to foreshadow how Rachel steals Laban's household gods. Laban said, good, let it be as you've said. I'm just going to keep you around, man. Laban's very selfish in that way. Laban he doesn't seem to intend to follow through because he's going to end up going back on his word. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black. So we see Laban trying to counter Jacob's plan and strategy. Laban's trying to make sure that he ends up on top and he ends up with more. And he put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. And Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Whatever is left over, Jacob gets. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar, almond, and plane trees, peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. And he set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. This is back to the whole importance of watering the flocks and how much this plays a role in the story. Since they bred when they came to drink. So Jacob is wise. He's very cunning here. The flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped and speckled and spotted. Jacob here using the scientific method. He knows how things work. And then Jacob separates the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. He's very strategic in what he's doing. We're going to see in the next chapter, God has revealed these things to Jacob in a dream and gave Jacob insight to take advantage of the system and kind of put Laban in his place. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay these sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock that they might breed among those sticks, which have to do with what's produced. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there, right? So that they ended up being Laban's. So Jacob ends up with the stronger, right? So the feebler would be Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. What did Rebekah, when God told Rebekah what was happening in her womb with Jacob and Esau, do you remember what God told Rebekah? Because she's trying to make sense of it. He goes, the older is going to serve the younger, right? The stronger essentially will serve the younger, which will appear to be the weaker. That's happening. It's beyond Esau and Jacob. It goes into the favor God has placed on Abraham, and it actually involves the nations. Thus the man increased greatly, had large flocks, female servants, male servants, camels, donkeys. Jacob came to Padan Aram as one guy with a stick, or whatever it is that he brought. He doesn't seem to be traveling with a caravan or any servants. He just shows up. So God told Jacob he would increase him. Jacob did not expect this abundance and increase would come through Laban taking advantage of him and cheating him over and over. But God turns it around for Jacob's good. Right? There's an image right there of the gospel. But Jacob becomes great by his cunning and as he's done throughout his life. But this time, it involves some insight and wisdom from God. It's not just Jacob going rogue. It's God giving insight and wisdom to Jacob to employ in order to accomplish what God promised, that he would abound, he'd be increased greatly. In the next chapter, we're going to see one of the, if not the greatest foreshadowings of the Exodus from Egypt. In Genesis 31, when Jacob and his family are going to leave Laban's house and start heading home. But there's going to be a lot of things that get in the way, some troubles, some hurdles they got to find their way around. And that'll be a good study. So thanks for watching this study in Genesis 30. Let me know in the comments if you guys have any questions or thoughts, anything to add, anything you want clarified. I'll be happy to respond. So I'll see you guys in the next Bible study walk through. in Genesis chapter 31. Hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more biblical content just like this. We have hundreds of videos, but you might be most interested in these ones right here. Also, visit our website for all of our free resources and classes. And thank you so much for partnering with us financially to make this ministry even possible. Keep moving towards Jesus, and I'll see you in the next video.